Sonic X Shadow Generations launched today, officially. It's been out for a couple of days in early access, which is how I played the game. And it's been incredibly fun. The game is getting incredibly good reviews. And so the question becomes, if you've never played a Sonic game before, is this a good entry point? Because, I mean, a lot of people just have never tried one of these. Or maybe they tried one in a very, very far past where they played like the classic Sonic games, or maybe they played some of the adventure games. And now they're sort of like seeing this success of this new game and they're thinking, is this something for me? So let's talk about that, right? Now, I have played Sonic games for my entire life, and I have played all of them. So to suggest that I'm biased would be very accurate. Nevertheless, I think my perspective can help you in your opinion. So let's start first with Sonic Generations, because this game actually really tries very hard to make the games very distinct from one another. This isn't just one title. You're buying two games here. You're buying Sonic Generations and you're buying Shadow Generations. And they bundle those two games together, and that's what you're purchasing. So even as soon as you boot up the game, you have to make the decision whether you want to play Sonic Generations or Shadow Generations. And this was quite surprising to me. I thought this would be like one title that had like an intertwined story, but no, these are really two distinct games. So let's start with Sonic Generations. Now, if you are unaware, Sonic Generations is a title that came out in 2011, and when it came out, it was actually also really successful. Sonic Generations is often seen as one of the most successful Sonic games, and one of the best ones ever released. But it did come out in 2011, and we got a remaster now in this Sonic X Shadow Generations version of it. But the remaster is pretty lackluster. You are playing a 2011 game. Now, it's a very good 2011 game, but the difference between Sonic and Shadow Generations is humongous. Like, even in graphical quality, which is a little bit strange because you would think that these are like equal in graphic fidelity, given that they are bundled in like one package. But no, you can definitely tell that the 2011 Sonic Generations part of this game is dated. It's still good though. It's still really good. But if you've played it before, you're just gonna be playing Sonic Generations again. If you've never played it before, you're probably gonna have fun, but it's not gonna be the one you come back to the most. Also, I will say, even both these games combined, the package still isn't very large. Depending on your skills with, or your affinity with this gameplay, I feel like you can finish both games combined in somewhere between 15 to 20 hours. Maybe a little bit less than that if you're really fast. Maybe a little bit more than that if you want to like 100% the game. This game is not the longest, which for some people is a very good thing actually. Not everyone enjoys spending 80 hours in a game before they can even see an ending. I'm just throwing that out there. You can apply your own preferences to that statement. But yeah, I would say finishing both Sonic Generations and Shadow Generations is probably gonna take you somewhere around 15 hours. And Sonic Generations is probably gonna be the longest part of that, because Sonic Generations has more stages than Shadow Generations does. Now, something that also really helps, especially for the Sonic Generations part, which we're gonna talk about Shadow Generations in a second, but sticking for Sonic Generations at the moment, especially for this part, it really helps if you like Sonic, because you get to play through stages that are like recreated throughout the history of Sonic, and you're playing through remastered stages, so if you don't recognize them, it's not gonna hit you with the same feeling. Same for the music. A lot of this is nostalgic pandering, that if you're not nostalgic towards these things, you're probably gonna feel like, meh. I mean, it's, even without the nostalgic factor, it's gonna be fun, it's just not gonna hit the same. But you're probably not buying this game for Sonic Generations. So let's talk about Shadow. Now, without over-exaggerating here, I think Shadow Generations is the best version of Sonic we've ever seen. It is ironic to me that the current best gameplay we've ever had in this franchise is not from Sonic. It is Shadow. The way Shadow plays is incredible. It feels so smooth. Now, this smoothness comes with some downsides. There are downsides to Shadow Generations, but I want to be very clear. There are very good reasons why this game is getting the praise that it's getting. It is remarkable how much there is to Shadow Generations in the short experience that it gives you. I finished Shadow Generations in about 5.5 hours. And I didn't do any completion stuff. I just did basically only the story. But there's not much here. The package is really tight, which is a good thing in my opinion. I don't like playing very long games, but 5 hours is pushing it here. Although you would have to remember that there's also the Sonic Generations part, but just sticking to Shadow, it's quite short. And that's a little bit of a shame, because you're gonna have fun throughout these 5.5 hours beyond belief. Like, every second you play of this game is gonna be fun to you. I promise you that much. This game is incredible. I think the best addition that we've ever seen to Sonic, which you won't feel this if this is gonna be your first game playing this, but I'm telling you, the best addition we've had are the new Doom powers. The thing with Sonic is that he runs incredibly fast. Shadow does this as well. And because he runs so fast, there's a very, very, very limited amount of options that you have while you're running through a stage. Very often, and you're gonna feel this while you play Sonic Generations, you're just running down an alley at max speed. And while you're doing that, you might be able to jump off and get to a new section, or you might be able to, like, unlock a short shortcut or something, but you're gonna feel that the path is like, it's linear, and there's not too much deviation. People often like to praise that the best Sonic games have deviation, because it allows for different experiences, and it gives you a sense of scale of the speed that Sonic brings. But you're just boosting, man. You're boosting, you're jumping, you're homing, attacking, you're stomping. That's what you're doing when you're playing with Sonic. Now, with Shadow Generations, they applied these new Doom powers. And the Doom powers suddenly allow you to do so much more. You can shoot spears at, like, switches that open up new pathways. You can just fly over the map. You can glide on the water, and you can use that to open new alleyways as well. You can use it to gain new heights, to get to new platforms. The way these Doom powers enhance the gameplay is remarkable. Sometimes you just get put in this giant open area, and the game is just like, hey, you gotta go there, bro. Good luck getting there. It's incredible how much freedom you get in this game, and it's incredible how little that limits the actual sense of speed. Because even in this giant area, you can blaze through it, and you can do it in all sorts of unique ways, and there has been so much effort put into this. Now, one thing that I had concerns about going into Shadow Generations were the Doom powers, because oftentimes when you get power-ups in a game, what will happen is they, like, halt all your movement, because we need to see this transformation of you going into this new power-up, and then you can continue again. And this wouldn't work in a Sonic game, because Sonic is, like, super fast, right? So if you suddenly get, whoop, oh, transformation, and then you can go again, it would feel so sluggish, and it would feel terrible. This doesn't happen in Shadow Generations. You are, without halting your movement, without any frames being spent to stop you, slow you down, you can just go through the stage, and it transforms for you automatically. You can just keep going. So that's really awesome. The amount of feel-good moments they put in this game is incredible. Now, this comes with a downside. All of this stuff comes with a downside, because the game really tries to make you feel like you're blitzing through these stages, and you're doing it incredibly fast, and you're going through places that you didn't think were possible. But the one thing that draws it back is that this forces a lot of cinematic sequences, which personally I'm not a fan of. Because the issue with cinematic sequences is that they look good and they are awesome the first time. Any other time you play through these stages, they become a hassle, because you just want to get to the gameplay again. You keep getting halted to be thrown around these stages to get to a new section of the stage. Sometimes the camera just likes to follow Shadow in a cool and dynamic way, which admittedly is cool and dynamic, but again, it halts my freedom, you know? And I want to be free. I want to blaze through wherever I want to go. But sometimes you're just not allowed to, and you have to wait for this basically cutscene to end before you get to blaze again. And then this oftentimes, because you're in this like void area, which is in the first stage, you're in this void area and it's pretty linear because the game is trying to tell you a little bit of a story. And so they even like suppress your ability to use abilities. And it's bit of a shame, but even still, it's still the best gameplay that we've had. It's just that it comes with new downsides. Another complaint that I personally have, which I'm really curious how other people are gonna feel about this, but I thought Shadow could be a little bit faster. Now, it sounds pretty ironic given that this is the Sonic franchise. I'm gonna compare it to a different game, which if you haven't played it, don't worry, I will elaborate. Sonic in Sonic Unleashed is so fast that it makes that game incredibly difficult. So much so that the first time you're playing a Sonic Unleashed stage, you will fail. You will fuck up, you will do terribly, you will bump into things, you will get hit by enemies, you will fall off pits. It will be horrible. But the second time you do it, the third time you do it, the fourth time, the fifth, now you understand the stage. Now you memorize it, now you know what's coming up. And in the speed that that game offers you, blowing through those stages, hearing Sonic say, yo, yo, that kind of stuff, that is still unmatched to me. I wish Shadow had that sense of speed. Because Shadow is probably the most cinematic version of the boost gameplay we've had, which I think works really, really well. I think it works perfectly for a game like this. It's just that personally, I would have liked to see some cinematography switched around for some even more dynamic gameplay. Because I really love a difficult stage that forces me to get familiar with the speed that the game offers me. I think Shadow feels almost the slowest boost gameplay we've ever had. Even compared to the Sonic Generations portion of this game, Shadow feels a little bit slower. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is, well, there's a couple of things I haven't mentioned yet. Firstly, let's just talk about the music really quick. And the music is really, really good. I especially like the music for a stage later on in the game, which I won't spoil right now. But it was really cool music. I think the music is good throughout the entire game. Both games, Sonic and Shadow, the music is always amazing. I think the music is also gonna hit you a little bit better if you've played the previous games, because they are callbacks to older games. But, I mean, they worked in the older games, so they work here. It's not like you need to know the song beforehand. Like, if a song is good, it's gonna be good in either game you put it in. So, the music is really good, and I like it. I don't want to stick around on the music for too long, though. Just know that if you're like an old school Sonic fan, all the new tracks are gonna be here. They're gonna be remastered. They're gonna sound cool. No complaints there. I wanted to stand still at the story a little bit, especially for Shadow Generations. Again, Sonic Generations. I mean, this story is 13 years old by now. Let's not stick around for that too long. Let's talk about the Shadow story for a moment. Shadow Generations also tells a lot of story about Shadow's past, which if you've never played any of the older games, you're gonna miss out on some details. But I will say they do a very, very impressive job updating you on what Shadow is about. I don't think you need to understand anything about prior games to understand who Shadow is in this game. They make it abundantly clear who is important to Shadow, why it matters to him, what he's gonna do about it. The story is not too complicated. You don't need any prior knowledge going into this. You will understand what's going on. I think that was a very important matter, because in Sonic Generations you see all these stages and they're not gonna hit the same, you know, if you don't really know where they're from. But in Shadow Generations, they even give you a recap if you're really interested. But I promise you probably won't even need to watch the recap. You're just gonna understand things. Also, let's be honest with each other here. Story doesn't really matter in Sonic games. Like, if you want a real amazing video game story, you would probably boot up The Last of Us over Sonic. So, but hey, it's here. It's pretty cute. I thought it was cute all throughout. I won't talk about the ending or anything, but yeah, it was a really cute story. So take that if you will. And when it comes to the Sonic Generations part, you're probably gonna feel a little bit left out on some of these references. You're just not gonna understand them. With Shadow Generations, I feel like you're a little bit more at home and you'll be able to follow along with everyone else, really. I also think most of your time will be spent in Shadow Generations, to be honest. Even though Sonic Generations is technically a bigger game, but I feel like you probably gotta push that aside after a couple of stages to focus on Shadow, because he's just so much more fun to play. It's just a hunch. Maybe you'll really enjoy Sonic, but I feel like most people gotta look at Shadow Generations here. Last thing I wanted to talk about is the boss fights. There are a couple of boss fights in both versions of the game. Okay, boss fights in Sonic games are atrocious. They've always been. I don't want to hear it. In the classic games, they were okay. In newer games, boss fights have always been absolutely dog shit. I don't want to hear anyone say anything else. Especially in these boost games. In these boost games specifically, where boss fights often like push you down the alleyway and you just gotta sprint after the boss, which is just annoying. Like, can we be honest with each other? They are not good fights. And those fights are in Sonic Generations. I don't like the boss fights in that game. I didn't like them in 2011. I didn't like them today. The boss fights are just not it in these games, okay? But then there's Shadow Generations. Shadow Generations does something very clever with its boss fights. At least I think. Because what Shadow Generations does is they're not really boss fights. They are cinematic cutscenes that are playable. And I don't mean in the quick time event kind of way. I mean, these are very, very easy boss fights. But they really show you all the cool shit that you've been learning. And honestly, they are very fun to play. I can't talk too much about the boss fights here without spoiling too much. Just know that they are more like set pieces. And they are basically here to show you, yeah, Shadow can do this shit. And he can do it very well. So, I don't think you're gonna come back to the boss fights that much either in this game. But they are fun to play through. And they are exciting to play through. It's a fun experience to experience these bosses. I think that's the best way I can put it. It's probably not going to be something you come back to very often. I feel like they share a lot with the other complaint that I had, that this game is very cinematic, which sometimes halts the gameplay, which is a little bit of an issue. I think these boss fights suffer from that the most. But nevertheless, seeing all the cool stuff happen is very exciting, especially if you do it for the first time. So, I'm honestly glad with the boss fights for once, which is probably the best compliment I could give it. That's very rare. Especially because Shadow Generations has quite a lot of them. It's a weird amount of boss fights, which, because they are so good, I'm not complaining about it, but it was surprising to me just how many boss fights are in this game. And then lastly, the one thing I almost forgot to talk about, but I just reminded myself of it. Sonic Generations is split up in two Sonics. There's the modern Sonic in which you boost through the stages, and there's the classic Sonic in which you do these 2D side-scrolling action, which I've never been a fan of the 2D sections. I've never been a fan of 2D in any Sonic game. Don't particularly care about the classic games too much either. 2D just isn't my thing when it comes to Sonic. Shadow Generations copies this. Shadow Generations has a 3D stage and a 2D stage for Shadow. The 2D stages in Shadow Generations work best, and they are probably my favorite 2D stages I've ever played in any Sonic game. They are unique because they put Shadow, which is not a 2D character, right? Shadow is not classic Shadow that doesn't know how to boost and that kind of stuff. And they put him in a 2D environment. So you can still boost. And you can still do all the power-ups that he has. You're allowed to do all of this. It's just that you're doing it in 2D now. Which allows for very clever platforming. And there were a lot of clever sequences in these 2D stages, in which I was very impressed by just how much they were able to throw at me without overcomplicating it for me. Because all the things need to be thrown at you at light speed, and you need to understand it at light speed, because otherwise you're gonna bump into a wall. So you need to understand it fast. And it was remarkable to me just how much they threw at me in specifically these 2D stages. And I was able to understand it in an instant. Like I only needed to see it once to understand what they wanted from me. And it's very hard to do without text on the screen that explains things to you, without tutorials. But they just made it so clear in these 2D stages that what I needed to do was simple. And if I did it right, it was very satisfying to pull it off. This is especially hard in a 2D stage because I'm going through the stage like this, right? And so I only have as far as this wall to see what is coming up. Meanwhile, if I'm in a 3D setting, I can see so far ahead of me as far as the render distance allows me to see. So I know what's coming up like a full 30 seconds ahead of me. In a 2D stage, you don't have that luxury. So they need to explain things to you very fast, especially because you're boosting. This was probably the most challenging thing to develop. I can only imagine how hard it was to... You need incredibly talented stage designers to make this work. Because it's way too easy to boost through a stage and fall in a hole because you didn't see the hole coming beforehand. It's just the way these games work. Shadow Generations actually does an incredible job at making these 2D stages fun. And for once, I don't mind replaying them again. They are super fun to play through. I think that's basically all I can give you for now. I just wanted to say that I thoroughly enjoyed this game. I wanted to gush about it a little bit, but I also wanted to give a perspective for someone who probably hasn't played any Sonic games in either a very long time or ever. And hopefully it's a little bit useful to you. I tried to stay spoiler free. I don't think I talked about any spoiler in particular. Maybe I'll do a spoiler talk sometime in the future because I really like to talk about this game. Probably gonna be more videos about this game on this channel too. I won't lie with you. But for now, thank you for being here and hopefully it was a little bit useful to you. And yeah, see you in the future. Alright, bye bye.